Hi, I'm Becca Dira, and today is the election episode for Song Talk. I went back and forth in my head about whether I felt that an election episode was the right choice for me and my platform. And I think the answer is yes. And I think the answer is yes because the things that are being voted on in this election will very directly impact my life. And as an American, as a Black queer woman that's American, and as someone who's college age, as somebody who lives in two pretty liberal states, even if I don't necessarily feel that I have the most political expertise in the world, I think the act of voting is a powerful one. It's one that many people fought for me to have the right to have. And I wanted to use my platform, no matter how big or small it may be at this time, to speak on issues that are important to me. And I think music of dissent is such a powerful tool and has been the soundtrack to so many movements throughout time that I wanted to unpack them. And I think the thing that I know a lot about is music. And so if I'm able to use something that I know so many people love to maybe open their minds or their hearts to what I think is the right move for this election, I owe it to myself to know that I tried. And yeah, without further ado, the first song for this election episode of Song Talk is Know Your Rights by The Clash. Know Your Rights by The Clash, I wanted to make the opening song of this podcast because I think that punk rock specifically is a genre that is all about dissent. It has, I feel, been a really powerful response to when people are frustrated with society as it is. And while genre, I do think, is a construct and a concept, it is a powerful one at that. And punk is about kind of saying screw the man, or there's this thing in the system that is broken and I'm going to acknowledge that and I'm going to talk about it. And so I really wanted to use this as an entryway into this world of having a political conversation because I think any political conversation that I partake in, I want it to be about the changes that I want to see, common ground that I can potentially see with other individuals, and at least acknowledge that there's a problem where there is one. And so some of the lyrics I really like from Know Your Rights is kind of like the opening of the song. Number one, you have the right not to be killed. Murder is a crime unless it was done by a policeman. The Black community in this country has been traumatized by the police for so long. And I encourage everyone who's listening to this to watch 13th to understand why your voting power does have a big impact on how things like police brutality or even the way your local police operates. It's impacted by the people who you're voting for. And yes, vote big, but also vote small, because the change that your governor or your Senate representatives can advocate for is really important. And I think sometimes we wait until the really, really big election to wake us up. I know I'm also guilty of that. That's not me pointing fingers and being oh, other people do this, but I've never done it. I think this election helped me realize that I need to vote in smaller elections as well. Because I think when people are super frustrated about the two candidates that they see, an important question I would encourage them to ask themselves is, well, did you vote small? Because that's what builds up to these things. That's what helps you get the pool of candidates that eventually becomes the party's nominee. Anyways, so Yeah, I mean, even though this song is from decades ago at this point, I think police brutality, it's so embedded within our society, and even the formation of the police came right after slavery was abolished and was supposed to be another way, another tool of oppression. It was never really about protecting and serving. And while I have my own beliefs on the police system as a whole, I encourage everyone to research what they would want the police to look like and what nominees are more likely to do that for them than to not. And in another verse, they go, in number 2, you have the right to food money, providing, of course, you don't mind a little investigation, humiliation. I think that I've seen at least like maybe 5 videos where like it's people going up and asking people on the street like, oh, like what are your political views, like da 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 da, and they'll be like, Kamala is a socialist, and then the interviewer will be like, what is a socialist? And then they can't answer it. And to me, I think this verse is impactful because regardless of your views on socialism, I think like a right to food, a right to certain American liberties, or liberties that I consider things that should be intrinsic human rights. I would encourage people, like, if you take the label of socialism out of it, what do you think people should automatically have? And is our government running in a way that is very individualistic, and like you have candidates who are actively trying to take away the things that the government has built in to help people? Read Project 2025. I'm not making this up. Why do you think that those things being taken away is good for you or good for anybody else? And even if the policies aren't perfect, because I have a lot of frustrations with the government as well, but like I think a lot of this election is getting on first base. But I'll leave that there. And then another verse. Number 3, you have the right to free speech as long as you're not dumb enough to actually try it. Donald Trump has actively used such harmful rhetoric towards people who have criticized him and or his policies, and has threatened to lock them up and to use his power as president to jail people for speaking out against him. There is nothing democratic about that. That is authoritarian, that is oppressive, and that is, in my opinion, inherently evil. You need the space to disagree in order to create any change, in my opinion. And the fact that he could be in charge of running this country and abuse his power in a way like that, it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind. But I'm taking a class on the Holocaust right now as a general education credit. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of the similarities between Hitler and Donald Trump are kind of scary. And I'm not saying that in like a fear-mongering way. I just mean the use of hatred of a certain group as a unifying tactic is a common thread. The use of people's vulnerabilities, and he is, I think, really effective at using certain groups of people as scapegoats. For instance, when he's blaming immigrants for the housing crisis, that's a scapegoat. And I'm not saying that there is no impact on immigration and these things. I would encourage you to research, honestly, but I am saying, first of all, this country is built on the backs of immigrants. Let's talk about that. I'll get into that more later, but like that kind of corralling people to hate a specific group is a tactic that is historically been used by authoritarian rulers. And I think a lot of people forget that Hitler was elected. Yeah, he tried to overthrow the government, but like people voted for him and they didn't know that it was going to get as bad or as crazy as it did. I mean, it's one of the worst atrocities in human history, but the point is be very mindful of who you are choosing and their long-term goal versus your long-term goal or short-term goal. I've heard people talking about voting for Trump just based on stimulus checks. If that short-term goal of you getting a stimulus check is worth your human rights or the human rights of your daughter, your sister, your mother, I think you really need to look within and re-examine. But I spent a lot of time on Know Your Rights by The Clash. Great song. Okay, moving on, we are going to listen to Fubu by Solange. And then right after that, All Right by Kendrick Lamar. Okay. I chose to put Fubu and All Right next to each other on this playlist because I think they are a really great modern commentary on Black issues. And I mean, those are two songs that I listen to in a completely casual context. Like, I tried to put songs on this playlist that I really enjoy, even regardless of their social commentary. Like, I enjoy the instrumentation, I enjoy the melodies, I enjoy the production, all of it. FUBU specifically, the acronym For Us, By Us, I think is such a powerful one. And I mean, yes, there's like the clothing brand aspect, but I mean, the idea of what was built by a certain group of people is really powerful. And through slavery, colonization, a whole other myriad of terms that we could use, Black and brown people built this country. I think that the attitude towards people who are from outside of this country, who weren't born in this country, can feel very hypocritical to me, because even if you take it all the way back to the founding of America, the British people were immigrants who wanted something different from the country that they were in England. And they said, we want democracy, we want to have a say, and America is going to be the place that we do that. Now, the colonization and the means that they used to make America their own, awful. But the initial premise of having a place where you have a voice, to me, sounds pretty decent. And so when people now who are American or naturalized citizens or whatever technical terminology you want to use act like immigration is the worst thing in the world, it can be really frustrating. And I think one thing that concerns me is the goals Trump has in terms of limiting legal immigration. Wherever you stand on the policies of immigration, I think legal immigration should always be an option. And I don't even see why that's a debate for certain groups of people versus others. Like, I understand that there are Americans who feel threatened, but I don't think the solution is saying, okay, let's keep everyone out. I think the solution is having better structures in place to deal with the issues that are making you feel threatened in the first place. And I think that Kamala, time and time again, has tried to share, like, hey, these are the things that we want to focus on building up for the middle class, whether it's small business loans or whether it's things to help new home buyers. Like, and I mean, political promises are whatever, but just even the values are so different on these core issues that I sometimes struggle to understand why it's a difficult decision. But I also, at the same time, know there are people who are growing up in a household where they are only hearing one opinion, and they're not being encouraged to research both sides. They're not being encouraged to hear anything other than the, like, kind of tunnel that they're already in. And so I try to approach that with empathy. But yeah. And also, when I hear of minorities or marginalized communities where people are like, oh, I'm not going to vote, I don't like either candidate, let's get on first base. There are people who died for you to have the right to vote. Even going back to the whole British thing, that right to vote, that affects all people, whether you're black, white, brown, like it doesn't matter. The right to vote is a fundamental one. And even if you don't think it makes a difference, and yes, I have my own beefs with the Electoral College and with the way that things work, but it doesn't change the fact that someone fought so hard for you to have that right to vote. You're just gonna squash it because it's easier to feel hopeless and turn off the TV and not participate. That to me feels silly, especially when I feel like there are a lot of resources that are trying to help people vote. And like one example I can think of is like the Lyft program to help people get to the polls. I believe it's 50% off of your ride if you use like the code vote24. Don't quote me, definitely Google it. But like if that's like a financial hardship, I believe that public transportation is also doing, or depending on where you live, it's also, there are also other channels other than paying for like an expensive rideshare app. But I really do encourage people to think about that. Okay, on to the topic of all right. One thing that I wanted to talk about was the role of black men in this election. And there was a clip that went around where Obama was basically calling out misogyny while speaking to a group of black men who he was encouraging to vote. And I wasn't expecting it to blow up the way that it did and spark as much controversy as it did. And I think like there's inherently you're held to a higher standard when you're part of a marginalized community. That's just the truth. Like when you're more privileged or people expect more from you, or like their unconscious biases like cause you to think like, oh, a man is smarter or more powerful or things like that, rather than based on the merit of individuals. I don't always think it's like I hate women, so no Kamala. I think a lot of the time it's like what you're socialized and programmed to believe from a very young age. And so I don't think you can always like fault people and be like, you're the enemy, da 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 da. I think you sometimes have to meet people where they're at. And I think he was calling out something that is always an issue when you're dealing with the topic of intersectionality, which Kamala Harris is as a black, Caribbean, Indian, American woman. And I think like we have to like encourage people rather than like not understanding why they might not want to. Like I think like it's really easy even for me to get really frustrated and be like, why the fuck would, or sorry, well, it's my podcast, I could swear. Why the fuck would you not vote for Kamala? Why the fuck would you vote for Trump if you're a black person? That makes no sense to me. He does not give a fuck about you. And yeah, maybe you don't think Kamala Harris gives a fuck about you either, but at least like there's a better chance. Nah, I think Kamala Harris might give a fuck about me, but like that's just my personal opinion. But I do think this like higher standard that I've seen her held to, like, oh, she's been vice president for the past however many years. Like, what has she done? What did Joe Biden do as vice president? What did Mike Pence do as vice president? Usually, the president elects a vice president to take their place if they die, maybe shake some hands at funerals, break Senate tie votes. But like, I do feel like there has been so much scrutiny on Kamala Harris's role as vice president that I didn't really see as much when Joe Biden was running for president after being Barack Obama's vice president. And that has been kind of frustrating. And the answer is it's misogynoir, which if you don't know what that is, it's like misogyny combined with being a black woman. So, yeah. Also, on a happier note, if you haven't seen the Pharrell movie Piece by Piece, he talks about like how in the wake of like everything that was going on with like George Floyd and like well, I think George Floyd was later. Everything that was happening with police killings in general really inspired the production of the song, and he was a producer on this song. Also, Soundwave, who works with Kendrick Lamar a lot, super talented. Dive into his music. Both of their catalogs fascinating, but the Piece by Piece movie, saw it with my girlfriend, it was so good. Okay, moving on. I will be playing Everybody Needs Someone by Victoria Monet. And then, and then I will be playing Wake Up Everybody by Harold Melvin.